Hi, my name's Keziah. This year, my parents beat me with a champagne bottle at my brother's birthday party because I wouldn't hand over the deed to my $450,000 condo. But maybe the real damage came long before that. I didn't know they'd already erased me from our family photos, or tried to sell my home behind my back. I didn't know they'd record a video calling me a traitor. All I knew that day was that I was walking into a celebration, not a setup. It was a warm Sunday evening in San Antonio, the kind where twilight lingers like it has something to say. I stepped out of my freshly washed Toyota, heels clicking against the stone path, gift in hand. From the outside, everything shimmered, cedar planked salmon on the grill, string lights blinking overhead, jazz floating through the air like a promise. But inside was a performance. And I wasn't part of the cast. Have you ever had to choose peace over people who share your blood? I have. And it looked nothing like justice, more like an empty house or a folded napkin left behind on a table no one saved you a seat at. This story doesn't end the way you think. Let's step inside and watch the mask slip. Let that sink in. I'm the daughter of the hosts. The woman who once babysat Lazaro during flu seasons, helped him with science fair posters, and wired him $75,000 when his startup was on life support. But tonight, I was a +1. That tiny label, +1, cuts deeper than most people realize. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come with yelling or slammed doors. Sometimes it's printed neatly on a guest list, telling you in size 10 font that you're not part of the family anymore. And here's the real-life truth. Families don't always break in loud ways. Often, they erode quietly, meal by meal, photo by photo, party by party. Maybe you felt it too, attending a gathering where you were once at the center, now seated at the edge. Getting the invite out of obligation, not inclusion. Being told through glances, misnames, and seating charts that your role has quietly changed. That's how betrayal works in real life. It's subtle, strategic, and when you finally realize what's happening, it already hurts too much to pretend you didn't. The small lesson? Sometimes, the first red flag isn't violence or cruelty, it's exclusion. The silent kind that tells you where you stand without saying a word. Trust those early shifts in energy. Pay attention when people stop seeing you, even when you're right in front of them. And that was just the beginning. I hadn't even made it to my seat yet, table 18, tucked behind a pillar, near the kitchen doors. But as I passed chandeliers and clinking champagne glasses, I didn't know that the real betrayal wasn't printed on the guest list. It was waiting for me under the spotlight, hidden in a microphone, and a video montage where my name no longer belonged. There's something oddly devastating about being listed as a +1 to your own bloodline. After the clipboard moment, I remember standing still for a beat too long, gift bag in hand, smile faltering just enough to sting. The man at the door didn't mean to wound me. He was just following a chart, reading names. But there I was, not under Reynolds' family, just guest of. I laughed it off, the way you do, when it's easier than asking questions. Guess I'm the lucky +1, I said, pinning the generic badge to my dress. But even as I said it, something inside me slipped. Not shattered, just shifted. That badge felt like a name tag that read, "You don't belong here anymore." Now, in some families, being labeled differently at an event is a mistake. But in mine, every detail is intentional. They knew what they were doing. You see, erasure doesn't happen in one swoop. It's done gently, with clean edges and polite smiles. And here's the part that really hits. I moved through that party being greeted like an outsider in my own origin story. Smiles that didn't reach eyes. Half-hearted hellos. No one asking where I'd been or how I'd been. Just pleasant indifference. You ever had that moment? Maybe at a wedding or a reunion, where someone you grew up with barely nods your way. Where you're standing near the snacks pretending to scroll your phone because no one invites you into conversation anymore. You wonder if it's just you. If you imagine being close. But deep down, you know the truth. Somewhere along the way, they redefined you. And forgot to tell you. And in that moment at table 18, tucked behind a pillar by the kitchen, I understood. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had rewritten the guest list and edited me out. The small lesson? Family rejection doesn't always come with harsh words. Sometimes, it comes with careful omissions. Your name left off a list, your photo missing from the wall, your story quietly cut from the family lore. And those moments, they matter. They are truth dressed in subtlety. As I sat near the swinging kitchen door, my silverware crooked and napkin folded like it had given up, I knew I wasn't just placed at the back of the ballroom. I was being reminded of my place in the family. And yet, even then, I kept hoping. Maybe it was just a mix-up. Maybe someone forgot to update the guest chart. Maybe, just maybe, I still belonged. But that hope, it would be tested the moment they called my name to the stage. Not to honor me, not to thank me, but to set me up. Sometimes, it's the smallest things that tell the biggest truths. When I reached my seat, table 18, hidden behind a thick marble pillar next to the kitchen doors, I noticed it right away. The napkin. Folded, yes, but not with care. It drooped to one side, like it had been halfway shaped into a swan, and then abandoned. The paper-thin wing fluttered under the breeze from the kitchen door, flapping every time a server pushed through with a clatter of dishes. At first, it almost made me laugh. It was such a tiny thing, a limp napkin. But then it started to feel familiar. Like me, present, technically, but unfinished, unacknowledged, almost decorative. You know what's funny? I used to fold the napkins at family dinners, back when I thought details mattered. Thanksgiving, Christmas, baby showers, I'd spend hours shaping those starched linens into swans, fans, little bows. Mom would smile at them, tell guests, "Kazia did those. Isn't she clever?"
But tonight?
I got a half-folded napkin. No fanfare. No name card. No real seat at the table. And that's the thing about family wounds. They don't always come from screaming or slamming doors. Sometimes they come from the silence. From the tiny overlooked details that whisper, "You don't matter here." It reminded me of something a friend once said after her dad forgot her birthday for the third year in a row. "It's not the forgetting," she told me. "It's that he never remembers that he forgot." Real-life example? I once heard from someone whose mom always mailed birthday cards to her sisters, but never to her. When she finally asked why, her mom replied, "Oh, I thought you didn't care about cards." No apology. Just a limp excuse. That's what that napkin felt like to me. Not a mistake. Not an accident. But a decision disguised as oversight. And still, I stayed. I sat at the table like I had a role to play, even if no one had given me lines. I adjusted the silverware, smoothed the edge of the napkin like it might sit up straight if I just gave it enough love. But you can't refold something that was never meant to be finished. The small lesson? Pay attention to how people seat you in their lives. Are you front and center? Tucked in the corner? Only invited to fill a quota? Sometimes the location of your chair speaks louder than their words ever could. And yet, even sitting in that back corner, I didn't know what was coming next. Because while I was fixing the napkin and pretending everything was fine, my name was being added to the itinerary. Not to celebrate me, but to humiliate me. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't yell. It smiles and hands you a microphone. I was still adjusting the napkin at my lonely little table when the lights dimmed, and a soft voice came through the speakers. And now, a few words from someone very special to us. Then my name echoed across the room. Kazia Reynolds. The applause that followed wasn't exactly enthusiastic. It felt more like polite obligation, the kind that fills silence but doesn't mean anything. Still, I stood, caught between confusion and instinct. I hadn't been asked to speak. I hadn't been warned. But I walked forward anyway, like a good daughter raised to perform on cue. My heels tapped against the marble floor in rhythm with my heartbeat. I kept waiting for someone to meet me halfway with a note card or a whisper of, "Don't worry, just say something short." But there was nothing. Just a spotlight too bright and a room too silent. At the mic, I squinted out at the sea of faces. None offering comfort. Not even Lazaro. He nodded, sure. But it wasn't a "you've got this" kind of nod. It was the kind you give when you've seen the rehearsal and know the ending already. Then the screen behind me lit up. I turned slowly as a video montage played, a glittering highlight reel of my brother's life. Childhood baseball trophies, science fairs, graduation hugs, that time he shook hands with the mayor. All narrated in my mother's voice, co-signed by my father's pride. Our golden boy, they called him. Our foundation. Our legacy. But do you know what wasn't there?
Me.
Not once. Not even in the background. I'd wired him $75,000 during his startup. I'd pulled all-nighters helping him design client decks. I once slept on the floor of his half-built office, so he wouldn't lose a contractor. But in this carefully curated legacy, I didn't exist. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a tribute to him. It was a stage built to erase me, right in front of everyone. Real-life example? A woman once told me her family posted an anniversary video of her parents online. It featured every sibling's wedding except hers, because she'd eloped. They said it didn't match the aesthetic, she told me. It's like they edited out my whole chapter. It wasn't about the video. It was about what they wanted the world to see and not see. That's the game. Families who protect their image more than their people will always choose optics over truth. The small lesson? If someone hands you a stage you didn't ask for, ask yourself what role they want you to play. Because sometimes, the mic isn't an honor, it's fate. As I stood there, camera lights flashing, my heart sank, not from embarrassment, but from understanding. I hadn't just been left off the guest list. I'd been drafted into a script where my silence would make them look generous, and my resistance would make me the villain. And then came the request. Not for a speech. Not for a toast, but for the deed to my condo. There's a fine line between love and leverage, and that night, my family crossed it. I had just begun to speak. My voice was a little shaky, sure, but I was trying to honor my brother. Trying to stay composed. Lazaro, you've always had a gift, I started. That's when my mother laughed. Not cruelly. Oh no, that would have been easier. It was the kind of laugh that floats on charm, the kind that makes everyone think they're in on some gentle inside joke. And then she said it. Wouldn't it be the perfect gift if you handed them the condo key tonight? The air changed. It wasn't just a bad joke. It was the kind of silence that happens when the room collectively forgets how to breathe. At first, I didn't even register it. I thought maybe she misspoke. But then Orville, my father, joined in. Come on, Kez. It's just a formality. You don't need all that space. Not like you're using the guest room. And just like that, the request became a command. Dressed up in sugar, dipped in guilt. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a public cornering, carefully staged under the illusion of family love. Here's what you need to understand. They didn't ask me to give up my home in a quiet moment, in private, with real conversation. They did it in front of 200 guests, with a microphone in my hand. On a stage. In a dress, I suddenly felt too small inside. That's not love. That's strategy. Real-life example? A friend once told me how her parents gave a long, loving toast at her wedding, and then, right before cutting the cake, casually asked her to co-sign a loan for her brother. We figured it's a day for family support, they said with smiles. The guests clapped. She signed it out of pressure. Years later, she's still paying off that debt. When love is conditional, measured by what you give, what you hand over, what you sacrifice, it's not love anymore. It's leverage. They framed it as a symbol of unity, a gesture of goodwill. But here's what I knew, standing there, heat rising in my cheeks. They didn't want the key. They wanted the narrative that I was so loyal, so loving, that I just handed over on cue. Because that would have looked good. That would have fit their story. The small lesson? When someone asks for something in public they should have asked for in private, it's not a request. It's control wearing a costume. Never let guilt talk louder than your gut. I looked at the crowd, some smiling, some uncomfortable, all watching. And for the first time that night, I said what I truly felt. This wasn't agreed on. A few gasps. A few raised eyebrows. A few phones clicked into record mode. And right then, I realized I wasn't just fighting for a condo. I was fighting to keep my dignity intact in a room that was trying to dress me in shame. What came next? It wasn't a verbal argument. It wasn't a private confrontation. It was violence. You expect family to hurt you with words sometimes. Maybe even silence. But you never expect the blow to come from a champagne bottle. I hadn't even made it 3 steps off the stage after declining their ambush of a request when I saw him, Orville, my father, standing stiff by the dessert table, not touching the cake, not greeting guests. Just waiting. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like he was chewing his own rage. Delora stood beside him, clutching a champagne flute and whispering just loud enough. She just embarrassed us. Not she's upset. Not we went too far. Not is she okay? Just she embarrassed us. That's when I knew this wasn't disappointment. It was war. I slowed, scanning the room for a familiar face. Thessaly looked away. Lazaro pretended to be very interested in the lemon glaze on his plate. The room was full, but I had never felt so alone. Then it happened. Orville grabbed the bottle. At first, I thought he was reaching for a refill. But then, without a word, he swung it sideways. The base of the bottle cracked against the side of my head. A flash of white. A sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a blackout, it was a floodlight. Blinding. Buzzing.
Loud.
I staggered. Warmth slid down the side of my face. And the room gasped. But no one moved. Phones went up. A few people murmured. But not a single hand reached out. Not to help. Not to hold. Not to stop it from happening again. And then Delora, still smiling, spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. You ungrateful brat. We gave you everything. There it was. The truth in a sentence. Real-life example? A woman once wrote to me about a fight she had with her mother, who slapped her in front of a Thanksgiving table full of relatives. No one stopped eating. No one spoke. Just the scrape of forks and the clink of glasses. It was like I disappeared the second I made them uncomfortable, she told me. That's what happens in families obsessed with image. They don't stop abuse. They hide it.
They normalize it.
They ask you why you made such a scene. And here's the awful part. As the blood trickled, as I bent to steady myself, as I tried to piece together what had just happened, people kept whispering, "Is she okay? She's being dramatic, right? That man hit her. I got it on video." It didn't matter. I was already painted as the ungrateful one, the difficult daughter. The problem? The small lesson? Abuse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it looks like politeness with poison underneath. And when it finally bursts, people may still defend the abuser, because it's easier to preserve the illusion than confront the truth. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I walked through that stunned crowd with blood on my dress and dignity in my silence. But the worst pain wasn't the bottle. It was knowing I could bleed in front of my own family, and no one would step forward. What came next? A hospital room, a nurse with a gentle voice, and a realization that would change everything. They weren't just hurting me. They were trying to erase me piece by piece. It's one thing to be hurt by the people who claim to love you. It's another thing entirely to look around the room and realize no one is coming to help. After the champagne bottle hit me, there were gasps. A few gasps. A few phones lifted. A few voices whispered. But no one moved. Not one hand. Not one step. Not one voice loud enough to matter. I could feel the blood sliding down my temple, warm and sticky. I pressed my palm to the side of my head to slow the bleeding, but it wasn't just the pain that made me sway. It was the realization that I was surrounded, yet completely alone. And in that quiet, I heard Delora hiss at Orville. She embarrassed us. I saw Lazaro stare down at his plate like he was reading scripture. Thessaly? She didn't even glance my way. I wasn't a daughter in crisis. I was an inconvenience. That's what silence does. It doesn't just fail to protect you. It tells you you're not worth protecting. Real-life example? A man once told me his sister was berated and pushed at a family cookout. Dozens of relatives were there. Nobody intervened. We didn't want to escalate it, his uncle later said. But do you know what she remembered most? Not the shove. The fact that her own cousins turned away. Pretended not to see. The psychology is simple but chilling. People stay silent in groups because they're waiting for someone else to act.
It's called the bystander effect.
But in families, that silence is even heavier because it's tangled with denial, hierarchy, image, and shame. In my case, that silence? It wasn't ignorance. It was permission. They had watched me be belittled, watched me be gaslit. And when violence finally arrived, their response wasn't horror. It was hesitation. Even my cousin Jonah, the one who finally yelled, "Someone call the police," never moved toward me. He stayed planted near the buffet table, hands empty, feet still. The small lesson? If your pain makes people uncomfortable, they may pretend not to see it.
But pretending not to see is a choice.
A betrayal. Silence doesn't make them innocent. It makes them involved. I walked through that room with blood on my dress and a steady stride, not because I was brave, but because I had no one to lean on, no one to catch me if I fell. But I didn't fall. I walked out into the night, called an Uber with shaking hands, made it to the ER alone. And do you know what the nurse said as she gently pressed gauze to my scalp? "You're not the first." Those 4 words broke something open in me. I wasn't just an isolated case. I was part of a quiet pattern, a legacy no one talks about. Some pain doesn't echo, it settles. Quietly. In your bones. In your breath. And sometimes, the first person to notice it is a stranger. I arrived at the emergency room just past midnight. My ride there was silent, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's dense. The Uber driver didn't ask too many questions. He glanced at the dried blood along my jaw and said, "You all right, ma'am?" I nodded once. Hospital was all I managed. Inside, the ER felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights made everything sharp, like they were trying to expose what the family gathering had tried to cover up. I filled out my own intake form, the pen dragging awkwardly through the bandage wrapped around my fingers. The nurse who finally called me back wasn't overly sweet. She didn't speak in sing-song tones or shower me in pity, but her voice was steady, her movements careful.
She made space.
And sometimes that's everything. "Anyone coming to stay with you tonight?" she asked softly as she cleaned the wound. I shook my head.
No.
"Just me." She gave a quiet, understanding nod. Not pity, not surprise, just recognition. "You're not the first," she said. And that sentence, for little words, landed heavier than the bottle ever did. She didn't mean it to minimize me. She meant it to connect me to the countless other women who'd walked through those same doors, quiet, hurt, pretending it was fine. Women whose wounds didn't come from strangers, but from dinner tables and shared DNA. Real-life example? A woman once emailed me after watching a video I posted. She said, "The EMT asked me who did it, and when I said my mom, he paused. Like he didn't know what to write." That's the kind of confusion family abuse causes. Even professionals have to pause. Because our world still doesn't know what to do when harm comes from the people who were supposed to protect us. I left the hospital with gauze along my temple, a mild concussion, and a diagnosis the doctor didn't say out loud. Betrayal fatigue. Not a medical term, but it fit. And that night, when I got to my friend Leah's place, I found a towel laid out beside the bed. A mug of untouched chamomile tea. The guest room lights softly glowing like it had been waiting for me all evening. I didn't drink the tea. I didn't cry. I just sank into the bed, shoes still on, and let the weight of the day press into the mattress. The small lesson? Healing doesn't always begin with justice or apology. Sometimes it starts in the quiet moments, a steady nurse, a clean towel, a room that expects nothing from you but rest. Sometimes strangers show you the kind of care that bloodlines forget how to give. But rest doesn't erase betrayal. And in the morning, as the sun filtered through Leah's curtains and the world started turning again, I reached for my purse and realized something was missing. My condo key. The one I always kept clipped to the inside.
Gone.
There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't bruise your skin. It shakes your foundation. Literally. The morning after the party, I was still tender, moving slow. My head throbbed with every movement. I reached into my purse, just wanting something familiar. My spare condo key. It was always there, clipped inside the small zip pocket. Always. Except this time it wasn't. I emptied the bag onto Leah's guest bed. Lip balm, phone charger, receipts, protein bar from last week, but no key. And in that moment, something icy slid down my spine. Not panic, clarity. The kind that clicks all the puzzle pieces into place, and you realize you weren't paranoid. You were being played. I remembered a week earlier, after a family dinner in Westlake, Orville had casually picked up my bag. "Thought it was your mother's," he'd said, smiling like it was nothing. I hadn't thought twice at the time. I wanted to. I didn't want to think the worst.
But now?
Now, the worst was thinking of me. That afternoon, my phone rang, an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. "Hi, Miss Kazia," the woman said cheerfully. "This is Jeanette from HomeQuest Realty. Just confirming your 2 p.m. appointment for the condo walkthrough." I sat up straight. "Excuse me?" She paused, confused. "It's scheduled under your name. Mr. Orville Sullivan is listed as the co-signer." My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. "I never scheduled anything," I told her, my voice sharper than I meant. A pause on the line. "Oh, would you like to cancel the showing then?" But I wasn't thinking about cancellations. I was thinking about how deep the betrayal went. They hadn't just humiliated me. They weren't just ignoring me. They were trying to sell my home. Without my permission. With a stolen key. And my name on the paperwork. This wasn't just a family rift. This was a heist. Real-life example? A woman I once interviewed told me her brother drained their mother's retirement account, then told the rest of the family she had gifted it to him. They didn't believe her. It took months of legal digging to expose the lie. "He used our love to cover his theft," she said. That's what this is. When family knows your passwords, your patterns, your trust, they don't need to break the door down. They just walk in and smile while they take what's yours. The small lesson? Family betrayal isn't always emotional. Sometimes it's financial, methodical, and quiet. Just because someone helped raise you doesn't mean they won't rob you if they think they can get away with it. And in that moment, I stopped mourning what happened at the party. I stopped hoping for an apology. I stopped wondering if I was overreacting. Because now I knew they were planning to take everything. So I started planning to take it back. There's something sacred about a lock. Not because it keeps others out, but because it reminds you what you're finally keeping safe. By noon that same day, I stood outside my own condo in East Austin. The sky was wide and indifferent above me, the sun pressing hard on the back of my neck. I had a locksmith with me, middle-aged, sunburnt shoulders, coveralls smudged with oil. He didn't ask many questions, just gave me a look that said he'd seen this before. He ran a finger around the edge of my doorknob, then glanced at me. "Someone's been in and out," he said. "See these scratches?" They didn't know the exact key placement. Weren't used to it. And just like that, it was confirmed. They hadn't just planned to steal my home. They'd already let themselves in. No break-in. No forced entry. Just familiar access. Casual, entitled, like it still belonged to them. I nodded, jaw tight. "Can you change everything?" He didn't hesitate. "Deadbolt too." "Yes, please." "As soon as you can." As he worked, I leaned against the hallway wall, watching him unscrew my vulnerability, one bolt at a time. Here's the part one didn't expect. I thought I'd feel empowered, relieved, safe. But instead, I felt grief. Grief for the trust I'd lost. Grief for the version of me that never thought I'd need to protect myself from the people who raised me. Because when a stranger breaks into your home, it's a crime. But when your family does it, it's a revelation. Real-life example? A woman I met at a legal clinic once told me her parents still had the spare key to her apartment, long after she moved out. She'd come home from work and things would be rearranged. Not stolen, just moved. As if to remind her, we still have access. We still have control. It wasn't about stuff. It was about ownership. That's what I realized as I watched the new lock go in. My parents weren't after the condo because they needed it. They wanted it because it was mine. Because they couldn't stand the idea of me having something they didn't give and couldn't take. The small lesson? Sometimes reclaiming your space is the first step to reclaiming your self-worth. You're not wrong for locking the door on people who've proven they won't knock. That night, after the locksmith left, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the silence, surrounded by familiar furniture that suddenly felt different. Because now, for the first time, it was mine. And just as the silence began to feel comforting, my phone buzzed. An email. Subject: Let's talk, Kezia. From Delora Sullivan. Message: We love you. This has gone far enough.
Come by.
Just us. Let's fix this. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I trusted her, but because a small, flickering part of me still wanted to believe in reconciliation. Sometimes people don't invite you back to make things right. They invite you back to make sure you're still willing to play your part. I pulled into the driveway slowly. The front lawn looked untouched, perfect even. Solar lights lined the flower beds, and the porch swing didn't dare creak. Everything was exactly where it should be, and yet it all felt off. Like the set of a show waiting for the actors to walk on stage. Delora opened the front door before I could even knock. "Kezia, baby," she said with a smile, arms open. "Thank you for coming." Her hug was light, 3 degrees too cold. The kind you give someone you're trying to win, not someone you've missed. Inside, the living room had been staged. That's the only word for it. Fresh orchids on the coffee table. Lemon tea in delicate cups. A plate of my favorite shortbread cookies, perfectly arranged. Framed photos that hadn't been visible in years. Me and Lazaro at the lake as kids. My high school debate finals. Blurry but full of life. Even the lighting was warm, golden, soft. It was all too perfect. Lazaro was already seated, perched on the armrest of the couch like a child being coached before a school play. He looked up, but said nothing. No apology. No remorse. Just a tight-lipped stare. And Thessaly? Absent. Just us, Delora repeated, gesturing to the plush chair I used to sit in every Christmas morning. We wanted to make things right. I didn't sit. Something in my gut told me that if I did, I wouldn't leave with the same sense of self I came in with. That's when Orville stepped out from the hallway holding a manila envelope. He gave me a look I couldn't name, part smug, part serene. "We've been thinking," he said, "about how to keep things fair and clear. No more misunderstandings."
He handed me the envelope.
Inside, a deed transfer agreement. Thick paper. Legal language. Cold and final. Asset clarification. Internal arrangement. Mutual understanding. It was all there. Everything except honesty. "You're asking me to sign away the condo," I said, voice flat. Delora smiled and folded her hands in her lap. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart. You don't need all that space. You're always traveling." Orville leaned in. "Don't you trust us?" And that was the moment the performance broke, wide open. This wasn't peace. This was theater, complete with props, lighting, and emotional manipulation dressed in cashmere. Real-life example? I once heard from a man who was called to a family dinner to reconcile after a falling out. They served his favorite meal, toasted to new beginnings, then handed him a loan forgiveness letter, asking him to sign away a share of his late father's estate. "They hugged me on one page," he said, "and erased me on the next." That's what toxic families do. They don't argue anymore. They stage reconciliation like it's a photo op. Like if the setting is soft enough, the betrayal will seem polite. The small lesson? A pretty room doesn't equal peace. When people choreograph an apology, it usually means they're trying to corner you, not connect with you. Real healing is messy, honest, unscripted. And this was anything but. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply placed the envelope on the coffee table, just to the left of the tea tray, and looked each of them in the eye. "You invited me here to hand over the last piece of myself you don't already control," I said. Delora blinked. Orville bristled. Lazaro stayed frozen. I walked out without looking back. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I left anything important behind. Some betrayals are loud, explosive, public. Others are dressed in calm voices, manila folders, and phrases like, "It's just paperwork." After I walked out of that staged reconciliation, I sat in my car for a long time, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. But something in me had shifted. That envelope didn't just hold a document. It held proof. Proof that I was never really invited to heal, only to surrender. Because the truth is, people like my parents don't want forgiveness. They want control that looks like peace. When I got home, I placed the envelope on the counter without opening it again. I didn't need to read the fine print. I already knew what was in there. I didn't need to decode the language. I'd heard it before, just not on paper. You don't even need that space. It's just a formality. Don't you trust us? That last one hit the hardest. Because when someone asks if you trust them after they've lied to your face, humiliated you publicly, and broken into your home, what they're really asking is if you're still willing to play dumb. I wasn't. So I made a call. Not to a sibling, not to a friend, but to a lawyer. Marlo. We'd met once before at a networking brunch. He wore thick-rimmed glasses and had a quiet confidence I remembered. I didn't expect him to answer on the second ring, but he did. "Kazia," he said. "You ready to go all in?" "File everything," I told him. "No warnings. No negotiations. Just file it." Real-life example? I once received a message from a woman who had been emotionally manipulated for years, constantly talked out of protecting herself legally, because family doesn't sue family. When she finally did file a restraining order, her siblings sent her hate mail. But you know what she told me later? That day in court was the first time I breathed freely in 5 years. Because sometimes the courtroom is the only place your voice isn't interrupted. Marlo got to work fast. He reviewed everything, emails, bank transfers, even my name still listed on the deed to their house. "You still own it," he said. "They've been living there on memory, not paper." And suddenly, the chessboard was flipped. I had power, legal power, and I was done apologizing for using it. The small lesson? Protecting yourself doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. And when people who hurt you accuse you of being dramatic or disloyal for taking legal steps, what they really mean is, "You're not letting us get away with it anymore." That day, we filed the notice to vacate. Quietly, without warning. No yelling. No back and forth.
Just facts.
Signatures. Consequences. Because sometimes the loudest kind of justice is paperwork sliding across a desk. Some battles aren't fought in living rooms or across dinner tables. Some are fought in signatures, in folders, in the quiet hum of office copiers, and they win without a single raised voice. By the time Marlo filed the eviction paperwork, I felt still. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just still. Like something heavy inside me had finally stopped thrashing. We didn't announce it. There were no warnings sent, no "let's talk about this" texts. Because there had already been talks.
Tea.
Cookies. Deed transfer traps. I was done giving them previews of justice. 3 days later it happened. The sheriff delivered the eviction notice. Not with drama. Not with flashing lights. Just a knock. A sealed envelope. And a uniform that didn't need to explain itself. I didn't see it happen in person. But Lazaro, ever the documentarian of curated family moments, sent it to our extended family group chat. It was grainy footage from a home security camera. Orville opened the door in a wrinkled robe, half a piece of toast in hand. He blinked like he couldn't believe reality had caught up. Delora stood behind him, frozen mid-sip, mug in hand. When the officer handed them the papers, Orville's face crumpled with a rage I recognized, but this time, he had no stage to swing a bottle on. He slapped the envelope against the wall. And just like that, the house they tried to sell out from under me was no longer theirs to stand in. Real-life example? A man once wrote me about his sister's husband draining their joint business funds. When she filed charges, her own mother called her a traitor. But you know what he said that stuck with me? Justice doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like no longer losing. That's exactly what I felt. That night, I sat in my condo, lights off, no music playing. The city buzzed outside like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. There were no fireworks, No cheers. No audience. Just me. And silence. But it was the kind of silence that no longer pressed on my chest. It sat beside me like an old friend. The small lesson? Justice doesn't always feel loud. Sometimes it feels like breathing without bracing for impact. Sometimes it's an envelope. Sometimes it's a set of keys that no longer open the door to your pain. I didn't toast the air. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I was just free. But just when I thought the worst was behind me, a message came through. From Thessaly. Only one line. They've done worse than you know. Sometimes justice isn't served with a gavel. It's delivered in a manila envelope and the sound of a front door closing for the last time. After the eviction notice was served, the house my parents had lived in for years, the same one they tried to sell from under me, was no longer theirs. The locks were changed. The furniture was moved out. Whatever meaning the walls once held evaporated the moment they were legally required to leave. But I didn't celebrate. There were no balloons. No triumphant soundtrack. Just stillness. Later that day, Thessaly sent me a message. Just one line. They've done worse than you know. Attached was a photo, an old family photo album, its leather cover fraying around the edges. Page after page, she had flipped through it and sent me a picture. But something was missing.
Me.
There were no snapshots of my birthdays. No blurry photos from Christmas mornings. No graduation caps or summer vacations or dance recital programs with my name on them. It was as if someone had surgically removed me from our history. And that's when it hit me. They weren't just pushing me out of the family in real time. They had been erasing me for years.
Piece by piece.
Smile by smile. Memory by memory. Real life example? A woman once shared that when her father passed, her stepmother gave out photo albums to all the siblings. Hers had every picture of her removed, cut out with scissors. It was like I never existed, she said. Like my presence had been a mistake they were correcting. And the worst part? No one else in the family had noticed. Or they had and didn't say a word. Erasure like this doesn't come with slamming doors. It comes with blank pages. With name tags that say guest. With family montages that skip you entirely. It's not always what they say. It's what they don't include. And it changes you. The small lesson? Silence and absence are tools, too. If someone can delete you from their memories, they'll delete your pain just as easily. So stop waiting to be seen by people who have already chosen to look away. That night, I didn't cry. But I did sit with that image of the photo album open across Thessaly's lap, my childhood wiped out in glossy pages. And for the first time, I said it out loud. Not with sorrow, but certainty. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. But if they thought that would break me, they underestimated what I had left.
Truth.
When people lose control of the narrative, they often go online to rewrite it. And if you're not careful, they'll turn your truth into their content. I woke up to it like an aftershock. A video posted by Delora, my mother, spliced together moments from the birthday party. But not the truth. Not the whole story. Just the pieces that made me look like the problem. The shaky footage showed me on stage, my voice catching. This wasn't agreed on. Then it cut to Lazaro smiling with balloons. A close-up of me standing stiff and awkward. A champagne toast. Laughter. And beneath it, a caption that read, "We raised her with love. We never expected betrayal." Hashtags followed like a trail of breadcrumbs. Hashtag family matters. Hashtag daughter of stranger. Hashtag heartbreak. I didn't even click the comments. But the previews were enough. Ungrateful. She's probably mad because she wasn't the favorite. We need the whole story. That's the thing. I had the whole story. They just didn't think I'd tell it. Real life example? A man once told me his father posted a Facebook status painting him as a greedy son who sued the family out of spite. What the post didn't mention, that he was defending his mother's stolen inheritance. But people don't ask for proof online. They read a sob story in a pretty font and believe it. So I didn't argue. I didn't comment. I didn't explain myself under their version of events. I uploaded a folder. Just a simple Dropbox link. Inside, screenshots of wire transfers, $75,000 to Lazaro's startup, the original condo deed with my name printed in ink, email threads where my parents asked me, pleaded even to cover bills, a voicemail from Delora. Just cover the mortgage this one time, baby. You know how much we love you. I didn't add any captions. No hashtags. No revenge anthem. Just the title. Truth if you care to see it. I sent it to the same family group chat Lazaro had used to post the eviction video. And then I logged off. The small lesson? You don't owe anyone a perfectly worded defense. You owe yourself peace. And peace doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from knowing you're no longer begging to be understood. Because when someone lies about you publicly, they're not trying to resolve anything. They're trying to isolate you, to control the story. But what they forget, facts don't need applause. They just need light. That afternoon, I sat at my dining table, blinds half drawn, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't refreshing the feed, bracing for the next blow. I was still. And stillness, I realized, is its own kind of revolution. But later that evening, I went looking for something older than screenshots or social posts. A box. From my childhood. Sometimes, the proof that you existed isn't in what people kept, it's in what they forgot to throw away. That evening, after the dust from the online drama settled, I found myself searching for something I hadn't thought about in years. A box. Not digital. Not saved to the cloud. But real. Tucked beneath old blankets in the back of a closet I hadn't touched since I moved. It was a shoebox. Faded, taped along one corner, still holding the scent of dust and something sweet, like time itself had tried to preserve it. Inside were scraps of a life I thought I'd long outgrown. A folded concert program from 8th grade. My college ID. A ribbon from a science fair no one came to watch. And then at the very bottom, a photograph. I was 8. Hair in crooked pigtails. Missing a front tooth. Grinning. Arms wrapped around a science trophy almost bigger than me. No one else was in the frame. And for the first time, I saw that image not as a lonely child but as a survivor. She was there. I was there. Even if they tried to erase it. And beneath that photo, folded carefully, like someone had meant to keep it, was one of the napkin swans from the birthday party. The same kind I used to fold as a kid. The same kind that sat limp on table 18 beside my empty seat. This one had been kept. Tucked away. Forgotten maybe, but not discarded. I don't know who held onto it. Maybe it was meant as a souvenir. Maybe someone couldn't quite throw me away completely. But that napkin? It was mine. Proof that I showed up. That I gave. That I belonged, even if they pretended otherwise. Real-life example? A woman once told me she found an old voicemail saved on her dad's phone. Her voice as a teenager, apologizing for something she didn't even remember doing. He kept it, she said. Which means I mattered once, even if he wouldn't admit it. And that's the strange part about memory. It outlives lies, if you let it. I held that swan in my hands for a long time. Its folds were soft now. Its corners weren't crisp anymore. But it didn't matter. It existed. I existed. The small lesson? Your identity isn't based on whether others remember you kindly. It's based on what you choose to remember about yourself. And sometimes, healing isn't about finding justice in courtrooms or group chats. It's about finding your photo at the bottom of a box and saying, "You didn't erase me. You just made room for me to find myself." I kept that swan, placed it on my dining table, not as decoration, but as declaration. Because they could delete me from albums. They could mute my name in conversations. But they couldn't take this. I am still here. In the end, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted a seat. One that couldn't be pulled out from under me again. A few weeks after the eviction, after the documents were signed and the silence between us had thickened into permanence, I decided to do something simple. I made dinner. Nothing fancy. Just pasta with garlic and thyme, the kind of meal you make when you're not cooking for an audience, just for yourself, and maybe someone who sees you for who you really are. Amina arrived right on time, arms full. Wine in one hand, a small orchid in the other. You need more green in here, she smiled, placing it by the window like she'd always belonged. We sat at the table, my table. No one else's name on the deed. No power plays. No scripts. Just soft light, a folded napkin, and presents. Midway through the meal, I glanced at the center of the table. There it was, the swan, the one from that party. Its edges a little worn, but standing upright, in defiance of every moment it had once represented. I raised my glass. To building our own tables, I said. Amina clinked hers to mine. And never begging for a seat again. And that was it. Not a grand ending. No orchestral swell. Just two women, a warm meal, and the quiet recognition that healing doesn't always need an audience. Real-life example? A man once messaged me after leaving a controlling family situation. He said he threw a dinner party for friends in his tiny apartment. Nothing big, paper plates and grocery store wine. But at the end of the night, he looked around and realized it was the first time he felt wanted without having to be useful. That night, he said, I felt whole. That's the thing. You don't heal by going back to where you were hurt. You heal by building something new. Something soft. Something yours. I didn't need the family photos anymore. Didn't need the staged forgiveness or the forced smiles. Because I had found something better.
Peace.
Not given. Not borrowed.
Claimed.
The small lesson? You are allowed to walk away without a dramatic exit. You are allowed to protect your space, your joy, your name. And if no one ever hands you a chair, you build your own table. That night, I didn't think about what I lost. I thought about what I'd reclaimed. My dignity, my home, myself. And I hope wherever you are reading this, you know that you can do the same. Because some stories don't end in reconciliation. Some end in liberation. Thank you for walking the story with me. If you've ever had to choose peace over people who share your blood, you are not alone. Tell your truth.
Fold your swan.
Build your table. And know that healing, quiet, powerful, real healing is possible.